The Lord be with you and good day. In this video, we are going to discuss Chapter 12 about operating lease for the lessor. This is part of our intermediate accounting 2. And let me introduce myself first. I am KMC from BSAC 2-1 and I will be your reporter for today. So the objectives of this chapter is to, number one, to understand lessor accounting in contrast to lessee accounting under the new lease standard. 2. To define an operating lease and a finance lease. 3. To identify the criteria in determining a finance lease on the part of the lessor. And lastly, to know the recognition of an operating lease on the part of the lessor. So palaging nababanggit dito yung term na lessor. So, lagi nating tandaan na dito sa topic na to, lessor na yung pinag-uusapan natin before kasi about the lessee tayo. So, lessor is the one who provides the right to the lessee. So, lessor accounting under the new standard IFRS 16 is substantially unchanged from the old one. So, yung accounting dito ay business as usual. So, the lessor shall classify leases as either an operating lease or finance lease. Unlike sa part ng lessee, under IFRS 16 by default, dapat finance lease yung gagamitin. Meron lang optional exemptions. So dito, maalin sa dalawa. Let us now move on to the classification of leases. So probably nabanggit na to before, but again, let's talk about it. So we have finance lease and operating lease. So when we say finance lease, there is a transfer substantially of all risks and rewards incidental to ownership of an underlying asset. So when we say all risks and rewards, nandyan yung paggamit mo ng underlying asset, nandyan din yung mga costs, maintenance, depreciation, so kasama yun doon. So we have two types of finance lease, which are direct financing and sales type. Pero hanggang dyan lang muna because matatakal siya sa future topics natin. Let's move on muna with operating lease. So dito naman, walang transfer ng risks and rewards incidental to ownership of an underlying asset. So kung sino yung lessor, sino yung nagpapaupa, siya pa rin yung may-ari, kanya pa din yung costs, maintenance, depreciation, property tax, or kung ano man. So, sa pagpili ng classification of leases, ang mangingibabaw ay substance over form. Substance of the transaction over the form ng contract or agreement. So, paano nga ba natin makaklassify ito? So, we have criteria na titignan. These are the four major criteria which are determinative in nature. Ibig sabihin, kahit isa lang sa kanila, makakapag-determine na or makakapag-direct na finance lease ito. So, four major criteria natin, tatandaan lang natin yung TOMS. Transfer of ownership, option to purchase, major part of the economic life, and substantially all of the fair value. So, ano lang yan, phrases lang yan, part lang yan, nung talagang criteria. So, tandaan lang natin yan. So, let's elaborate them. The first one, the lessee transfers ownership of the underlying asset to the lessee at the end of the lease term. So, karaniwan ito yung mga rent-to-own. Number 2, the lessee has an option to purchase the asset at a price which is expected to be sufficiently lower than the fair value at the date the option becomes exercisable. At the inception, it is reasonably certain that the option will be exercised. So dito naman, parang ganun din, may transfer of ownership din sa dulo kung gagamitin ni lessee yung option to purchase. So sabi dito, i-classify siya under finance lease kapag sa inception, parang malaki na yung chance na alam mo na bibilhin niya yun, gagamitin niya yung option niya to purchase. So, kapag sinabi natin inception, it should be differentiated with commencement date. But usually, tulad lang sila. But there are instances na hindi. So, ang inception kasi, it is the date earlier between, number 1, yung pagkakaroon ng kasunduan or agreement ng parties, and number 2, yung pagsisimula nung pagsasagawa ng agreement na yun. Kasi diba, hindi naman palaging sabay yun. So, yun lang, differentiate lang natin sila. But, yun yung simula nung nagkaroon ng agreement, yung parties involved. So, ayan, under this situation, ika-classify siya as finance lease. Yung third naman, the lease term is for the major part of the economic life of the underlying asset even if title is not transferred. So, pag sinabi nating major part, sabi ng US GAAP, at least 75% ng economic life ng underlying asset ay magagamit para doon sa lease. Halimbawa, ang economic life ng asset ay 5 years. Tapos, ang lease term ay 4 years. So, 80% ng economic life ay magagamit noong lessee. So, kapag ganun, yung lease ay kaklasify na as finance lease. Okay? So next naman, the present value of the lease payments amounts to substantially all of the fair value of the underlying asset at the inception of the lease. Halimbawa, ang fair value at inception ay 100,000 pesos. Tapos, ang lease payments, ang total ay 90,000 pesos. So, ito ay i-consider as finance lease dahil ayon sa US GAAP, at least 90% ang mako-consider na substantially all ng fair value. E di ba 90% ng 100,000 ay 90,000. So, ibig sabihin, yun ay under na ng finance lease kasi parang kasing presyo na siya nung fair value nung underlying asset. Okay? So, ito naman, itong 75% and 90% na to ay parang debatable pa according to our book. But most of the time, sila yung sinusunod. So, we also have other criteria aside doon sa major criteria. So, itong mga to ay suggestive in nature. So, hindi sila ganun ka-direct. But, individually or combination nila ay pwede na ding tumukoy sa isang finance lease. Okay, the first one, the underlying asset is of such specialized nature that only the lessee can use it without major modification. Halimbawa nito, kapag merong power distributor, tapos nagre-rent sila ng machineries sa ibang bansa pa. So, di ba, madalang naman yung power distributors. So, sila lang yung halos gagamit ng ganun. Kapag specialized, so under finance lease sila agad. Next, if the lessee can cancel the lease, the lessor's losses associated with the cancellation are borne by the lessee. And sunod ko na rin to, gains or losses from the fluctuation in the fair value of the residual accrue to the lessee. So, ibig sabihin lang dito, parang shouldered ni lessee. Kung shouldered ni lessee yung mga losses na yan, yung gains na yan, under finance lease siya. Last, the lessee has the ability to continue the lease for a secondary period at a rent that is substantially lower than the market rent. So, pag natapos yung isang term, pwedeng magkaroon ulit ng panibagong period, pero yung renta niya mas mababa na kesa doon sa market rent, yung kung magkano talaga yung usual na renta. So, kapag ganon, under siya ng finance lease. Let us now proceed with land and building lease. So, lessor normally considers the land and building elements separately. Pero kasi 'di ba usually pagka umupa ka, minsan magkasama yung dalawang yun. Pero yun nga, pag kinonsider sila, magkahiwalay. Bakit? Because land normally has an indefinite economic life. Pero yung building, hindi ganun. Meron siyang definite economic life. Kaya dapat magkahiwalay sila. Si land kasi usually under siya ng operating lease. So, hindi pwedeng ipilit na magkasama. But, meron naman diyang mga exceptions. So, pag-usapan natin yan dito. So, we have 3 important points here. First nga ay yung classification na sabi na natin either as finance lease or operating lease separately at inception. We have lease payments, which are allocated to relative fair value of the leasehold interest in the land and building elements. So, ibig sabihin nito, yung fair value ang basihan ng pag-allocate. So, halimbawa, yung fair value ng land ay 2 million and then ang fair value ng building ay 1 million pesos. So, total of 3 million yon. Ngayon, pag nag-allocate ng payment, ng lease payments, ang ma-allocate sa land ay 2/3 and doon naman sa building ay 1/3 kasi nga, binase yon sa fair value nila. Ngayon, may instances na hindi maa-allocate reliably kasi mahirap i-determine or paghiwalayin yung kanilang fair value. So, kasi nga madalas magkasama na. Kapag ganun yung nangyari, entire lease is classified as finance lease unless malinaw na pareho silang under ng operating leases. Okay, so ito yon kapag hindi ma-allocate reliably. So for our last point, ito yung kapag ang amount ng land ay hindi na masyadong material, hindi na siya substantial i-consider masyado. So in this case, we should treat land and building as a single unit for lease classification. And dito, ang economic life ng building yung gagamitin. So kapag i-classify sila, either finance lease or operating lease, gagamitin lang natin yung mga criteria na nabanggit kanina. So we will now move on to the main part talaga ng lesson na ito, which is operating lease for the part of the lessor, sa POV ng lessor. A lessor shall recognize lease payments from operating lease as income, either on a straight line basis or another systematic basis. Straight line basis, tulad yung amount na binabayad over the lease term. 10,000 a month, 20,000 a month, kung ano man yan. Dapat tulad-tulad lang siya. Ito namang another systematic basis, parang second option na lang siya. Kasi ginagamit lang siya if it is more representative or mas mapipresent niya reliably yung way ng pag-benefit doon sa underlying asset. So, hindi siya madalas nagagamit. So, ito yung journal entries natin when we recognize kapag operating lease, no? So, we have rent receivable or cash, debit, and then credit, rent income. Since ito nga po ay support na ng lessor. So, again, income siya nire-recognize. So, for the balance sheet presentation naman, yung underlying asset presented pa rin according to its nature. And then, it remains as the asset of the lessor. So, kasi nga operating lease, walang transfer of all risks and rewards. So, dahil nga kay lessor pa rin siya, si lessor pa din yung mag-shoulder ng executory costs. Halimbawa niyan, depreciation expense, maintenance, insurance, real property taxes, at kung ano-ano pa. However, lessor may pass some expenses to the lessee. And we should also note na depreciation policy is the same with the normal recording of depreciation. Kung paano tayo mag-depreciate, ganun pa rin dito, since si lessor pa rin yung may-ari. Now we will proceed sa tatlong ito. How are they treated? So, initial direct cost includes yung mga fees for arrangements, negotiation para sa lease agreement. So, it is added to carrying amount expensed over the lease term. So, dinadagdag siya doon sa carrying amount ng asset. And then, kapag lumipas yung lease term, ina-expense. Next, we have security deposit, which is considered as the liability of the lessor. Halimbawa nito, kapag renta ng kwarto, nanghihingi ng deposit para in case na may masira, ganyan, hindi na kailangan pa maghabol ni lessor, kumbaga secured na siya. Ngayon, kung hindi naman nakasira, wala namang nilabag dun sa napag-usapan, ibabalik ito ni lessor kay lessee. So, kaya naging liability yun. We also have lease bonus, which is considered as an earned rent income amortized over the lease term. Now, dito na natin mas maiintindihan yung mga sinasabi ko kanina. So, ito, illustration na to ay kapag may equal payments dito kay simple company. So, yun yung pinapakita niya. So, mag-annotate tayo if kailangan. The first transaction shows lang yung pagbili ni simple company ng machinery na ipapalis or papaupahan nila. So, we debit machinery for 3 million pesos and ganun din naman si cash, ika-credit natin. On April 1, simple company leased the machine to another entity for 3 years at a monthly rental of 50,000 pesos payable at the beginning of every month. So dito, minultiply na siya sa 9 months. So bakit 9 months? Kasi April nag-start. So April hanggang December, 9 months. So cash debit for 450,000 pesos and credit rent income for the same amount. So sabi ko nga, rent income, ganun i-recognize yung payments kay lessor. So, number 3, on April 1, simple company received a a security deposit of 600,000 pesos to be refunded upon the lease expiration. So, meron tayo ditong security deposit na sabi natin, i-recognize siya as liability. Kaya, yung liability for rent deposit ay naka-credit dito. Pwede namang security deposit din yung ilagay dito. So, we credit cash, 600,000 pesos, and same amount, we debit cash for 600,000 pesos, and the same amount is credited to liability for rent deposit. Next, in addition to the rental, Simple Company received from the lessee a lease bonus of 120,000 pesos on January 1. So, meron tayong lease bonus na 120,000 pesos, kaya meron din tayong unearned rent income na nakakredit. So, ayan, yung nagbe-make sense na yung mga discuss natin kanina. Number 5, on April 1, Simple Company paid initial direct cost of 300,000 pesos. So, we have initial direct cost. At ang sabi, nagiging part siya ng carrying amount. So, ina-add siya. Kaya meron tayo ditong naka-debit na deferred initial direct cost, which is 300,000 pesos, and ika-credit natin si cash since nag-incur nga siya ng cost. So, number 6, during the current year, Simple Company paid repair and maintenance of 20,000 pesos. So, dahil si Lessor pa din, si Simple Company pa din yung owner, siya yung magbabayad nito. Debit repair and maintenance for 20,000 pesos and credit cash for the same amount. Next, the lease bonus is amortized over 3 years or 40,000 pesos annually for 30,000 pesos for 9 months. So, ito, baka medyo may malito sa atin. So, yung term niya ay 3 years. So, itong bonus na na-receive natin, ito yung tinutukoy dyan, number 4. Yung bonus na na-receive dito ay i-amortize over 3 years. Kaya naging 40,000 kasi divide natin si 120 divided by 120,000 pesos divided by 3. Kaya meron tayong 40,000. Itong 40,000 na to, hindi natin siya inilagay dito dahil 9 months lang naman yung nagamit from April to December. Kaya meron tayong 30,000 pesos. Credit yung rent income, then debit si unearned rent income. Since lumipas na nga yung lease term, kumbaga kinita na siya na kung sa service, nagawa na siya ni Lessor. Number 8, we have the machinery is depreciated over 10 years or 300,000 pesos annually. So, yung nabili natin na machinery kanina, ito, 3 million, and may 10-year life siya. So, yung 3 million na yun, divide natin by 10, kaya meron tayong annual depreciation na 300,000 pesos. Debit depreciation, credit accumulated depreciation. So, sabi ko nga, shouldered pa rin siya ni Lessor. Dito sabi, note that the depreciation is from the date of acquisition, January 1, and not from April 1, the date of lease. Kasi kahit naman hindi pa nisa-start yung lease, as soon as naging available na siya for intended use, sorry, hindi ako marunong gumamit nito, no? Available na siya for intended use, doon na mag-start yung depreciation niya. So, idle property is subject to depreciation as long as it is available for intended use. So, naulit to. Tandaan natin to. Available for intended use. So, number 9, the initial direct cost is recognized as expense over the lease term. So, balikan natin. Magkano yung initial direct cost? 300,000 pesos. So, we debit amortization of initial direct cost, 75,000 pesos, and credit deferred initial direct cost for 75,000 pesos as well. So, yung annual amortization natin, yung 300,000 natin, i-divide natin sa lease term. Itong 3 na yan, yun yung lease term. So, meron tayong 100,000 pesos per year. And then, amortization for 9 months ay 75,000 pesos. So, yung proportion lang, i-multiply lang natin. I-fraction lang natin yan. So, the balance of deferred initial direct cost shall be presented as an addition to the carrying amount of machinery. So, ibig sabihin, yung na-amortize mo na hindi mo na yun isasama. Yung natitira na lang. So, ang natitira doon ay 225,000 pesos. Kasi 300,000 pesos minus 75,000 pesos. Bakit hindi siya kasama? Kasi na-amortize na, kumbaga expense na siya na-recognize na siya as expense. Kaya ang i-add na lang natin kay asset, dun kay machinery, ay yung natitira. So, sana malinaw tayo doon. So, dito meron nga tayo ulit equal payments. So, dito naman sa kasunod, we have unequal payments. Under IFRS, where the operating lease requires unequal cash payments, total cash payments for the lease term shall be amortized uniformly on the straight line basis as rent income over the lease term. So, sabi nga, straight line basis. Dapat kung magkano yung siningil mo ngayong month, ganun din sa mga kasunod na month. Ganun mo siya i-record. O, halimbawa, sa isang building, nagparenta ko for the first 3 months, 10,000 pesos a month. And then yung mga sumunod, magiging 20,000 pesos. Kahit magkakaibang amount yung natatanggap ko doon sa mga months na yun, still, ang pag-record ko ng income ay uniform. Yun pa din. 10,000 pa din kasi yun yung nasimulan ko. So, ganun yun. Let us look at this illustration. First, on January 1, 2021, company leased office space to another entity for a 3-year period. So, 3-year yung lease term niya. So, office space, no? Under the terms of the operating lease, rent for the first year is 1 million pesos and the rent for the next 2 years is 1,250,000 pesos annually. So, ito na nga, may nagbago, diba? Doon sa bayad. However, as an inducement to enter the lease, company granted the lessee the first 6 months of the lease rent-free. So, first 6 months ay free, libre. First 6 months ay libre. Kaya kung makikita natin dito, ang ni-recognize kasama sa total rental ay 500,000 pesos lang for year 1. And then 2022 and 2023, 1,250,000 pesos pareho. So, ang total niyan ay 3 million pesos. Sabi dito, i-divide pa rin siya para ma-apply pa rin natin yung straight line basis. So, 3 million divided by 3, which is the lease term, is equal to 1 million pesos. So, paano yung record natin? So, 2021, we debit cash and rent receivable for 500,000 pesos each. Bakit? 500,000 pesos lang naman. Sabi dito, 500,000 pesos lang naman kay 2021. Kasi nga, sabi, rent income should be recognized pa din as 1 million. Dapat straight line basis. So, ni-recognize natin si 1 million. Kaya, yung, kumbaga, si rent receivable, magiging parang balancing figure na siya dito. Okay? So, siya naman, mababawasan naman siya sa mga kasunod na year. So, in 2022, we debit cash for 1,250,000 pesos kasi ito talaga yung na-receive. Kung mapapansin natin, yung amount sa cash, yun talaga yung mga na-receive natin. Yan yung normal. Pati dito sa 2023, yan yung actual na na-receive talaga. But, sa rent income, laging 1 million. 1 million ng 1 million palagi yung ating nire-recognize. Okay? So, dahil dyan, para mabalance natin, babawasan natin ngayon si rent receivable na ni-recognize natin yung 2021. So, doon mapupunta yung 250,000 pesos. Okay? So, yun nga, rent income for 2021 and 2022 equal to 2 million. So, ito yung dalawang yun. Rent collected, ito yan, 500,000 pesos and 1,250,000 pesos, 1,750,000 pesos. So, matitira na lang ay 250,000 pesos. So, itong 250,000 pesos na to, ito na siya. Yan na yung i-recognize natin sa 2023. So, we have cash na receive natin, 1,250,000. Rent income, again, 1 million uniform yan kasi straight line basis pa rin. And yung rent receivable, again, para mabalance siya at para ma-zero out na tong unang to, i-recognize natin siya. I-credit natin siya ngayon. So, zero na si rent receivable. Ayun. Note that the rent receivable had a zero balance on December 31, 2023, and the recorded rent income each year is 1 million pesos. So, I hope may naintindihan tayo sa ating discussion ngayon at nakatulong ako for better understanding of this topic. Thank you so much for listening.